Monica, is there such a thing as teaching too much too soon? And so the reason I ask that is, for example, back in the day, the earlier you started school, the better. It used to be that case. However, the government has now implemented a policy where you can't start school until a certain age. And I'm not quite sure what the reasoning for that is, but what they say is that sometimes young minds are not able to absorb the information at the rate that they'd like, and then it ends up to, leads up to people failing, and then they lost in self-confidence, etc., and so on, and they never go through the entire schooling system. So is there such a thing as teaching too much too soon?
I think there's such a thing as exposing children to wrong things using the wrong methodology. So what we are seeing is in the early childhood development sector, there's a huge outcry against schoolification of young children. If we compare education systems, we all know that Finland is one of those benchmarking education systems where young children don't enter formal schooling. They remain in a relaxed environment where they can explore, where they can play, and by playing they learn, and where children are not forced to develop at a particular pace. They develop at their own pace. And I think that's the secret with learning and with education, is that we lay solid foundations. We give children enough exposure. When they are very young, we make sure we talk to them. We make sure they learn how to be good human beings through socialization. And there's a time when they will be ready to assume the more formal academic work that is required. Childhoods have changed dramatically. We see our children being forced into a formal situation by the age of 3, wearing uniforms. And so the ECD sector is saying this is not what's in the best interest of children. They need time to explore, and they really need time as young children to gain the skill sets that they need. And it starts with social skills first, and then the academic skills will follow. I think we should never forget that the brain develops the most in the early years, and there are certain windows of opportunities even before the age of 2, and that we should just capitalize on that. Children are ready to learn, and specifically before the age of 2, they are very receptive, and we find that many of us lose that opportunity before the children are 2 years old. We seem to think they can't respond, so we don't talk to them, we don't play peekaboo with them, we don't give them the physical experiences of being on the floor, crawling and discovering. And that really hampers children's further development. So,
how much of this, sorry to interject, how much of this has to do with the way in which people live, right? So, for example, you can argue that because of urbanization, people have less and less living spaces, right? And maybe they don't have gardens anymore. And so you don't have the luxury of allowing your kid to crawl, as you may say, because maybe you live in the 24th floor of a building and it's dangerous.
Yes, so definitely. And I think, I really believe that parents and mothers, specifically mothers, are born ready to react and to be able to care for their children in the best possible way. And we should never underestimate how difficult it is to raise young children, and also the circumstances in which we are raising them. But there are ways in which we can overcome this. Even in the smallest of spaces, we should be allowing children to be exploring, and really need to plead with government to create open park spaces also where families can take their children, or caregivers can take children, to have the time to actually explore and develop. I think society and the way that we live contributes and sometimes negatively impacts children's development. And so we need to be mindful of that. How much time a child spends being carried around, how much time a child may potentially spend in a car, and how do we then balance that as we have time with our children. Screen time, we should put a lot of emphasis on no screen time for children younger than 2. We're seeing how parents are sucked into screen time on various levels. And so the interaction with children becomes less and less. So children need for us to be available, need for us to be looking them in the eyes, reflecting with them, singing songs with them, talking to them. I think as young parents, we should all be thinking about where am I investing my time? And if I have children, do I find the 10, 20 minutes a day? Because it seems as though that's the average time that parents have with their children. And how do I then choose to spend that? Do I choose not to have rich conversation? Do I rather than, withdraw from them and spend time on my phone, answering WhatsApp or Instagram or so on? So I really believe that as society, if we are mindful of where our children spend their time, how they spend it, how we interact with them, and we can use extended family to fill the gaps for us.
So, Monica, speak to us about nutrition now, for example, and how that will aid in developing a young mind.
So nutrition is critical. If we look at the brain development, 80% of that occurs in the first 2 years of life. And children really need the proteins and the vitamins in order for the brain to really develop fully. And so children who don't get the adequate nutrition will not fully develop their potential and their brain capacity. And so when we talk about early childhood, it is important that children get the right nutrition for their particular age group so that they can really grow healthy minds and bodies.
One of the things the Minister spoke about in outlining her plan is a plan to move ECD centres away from social development and into basic education. And when we started speaking, you mentioned that they do fall under social development. Is this a good idea? Does it sound like a good idea to move ECD centres? Because quite a lot of education also has to do with the social development, the family life, the community children are in, the schools, the centres are in. Would it be a good idea? What would be the disadvantages of moving from social development?
I think the plan to move this is partly supported by the ECD sector. However, there are some concerns around whether the schools are the right kind of infrastructure for young children, whether this, and it's very unclear whether it's simply a role change in terms of oversight, monitoring and support, and whether it's physically relocating these schools, which in my opinion would not be the best in the best interest of children. We know that grade R currently is also delivered by a number of community-based sites. And so we would like to advocate that children remain in these ECD sites, but that the function, the monitoring, the support then moves to the Department of Basic Education. I think one of the positive aspects of moving it into the Department of Basic Education is that the care of young children will now also expand to not just be about keeping them safe whilst parents are at work and providing them with a good nutritious meal, but that we would also get the early learning component to happen in these ECD centres. Unfortunately, we have ranging quality standards. We don't always see the best practice happening in all of these ECD centres. And so children don't all get the right start before they actually go to school. And so if it's under the auspices of the Department of Basic Education, we hope that the quality of early learning experiences through play will actually lay the foundations needed so that children will have the pre-literacy and the pre-numeracy skills. We do very poorly as a country in terms of our mathematics and also our literacy skills. And although children pass through the education system, they are still functionally illiterate and not numerate at all. And I think it stems back to if a child is in an ECD care situation where it's just about feeding and sleeping, we can expect those kinds of poor results towards the end of matric. But if we get those early years right and we get children to have the right kind of resources for them to be exposed to what we call play-based learning, not worksheets, not sitting behind a desk, but actively exploring their world through play and having someone that is skilled to actually guide their play and to capitalize. So if a little boy finds a snail and is very interested in that, to have the adult in his space be able to take that learning and that interest and to actually advance that through questions and conversations and bringing a book about snails into the room, giving that little boy or girl a magnifying glass, talking about the parts of a snail, because children will lead their own education. They show us very clearly what they are interested in. And if you're a vigilant adult, you'll pick up on their interests and you'll build education on that.
But then very quickly, because we're going to have maybe just 45 seconds for this, does that mean that people shouldn't be taught everything? If you just specialize from an early age, is that what it means?
No.
Because, for example, if a young person is only interested in snails, and then you concentrate on that, and then maybe you don't speak about, I don't know, I'm trying to think of another example, but that's essentially my question. Does that mean that you should rather concentrate on what the young person is interested in?
Young children need the breadth of skills so that eventually they can specialize.
Okay. Thank you very much for joining us. Monica Bach joining us here in studio, CEO of Cotlands. Let us know what your thoughts are. If you've got any questions at 405 Mornings, and don't forget your hashtag Breaking Dawn on 405.